Welcome to Shovel Talk, a podcast for economic developers. From your friends at the Golden Shovel Agency.
Welcome to 2026 and welcome back to Shovel Talk. I am producer Darren, back in 2026 to kick off our new season of episodes. Before we get into introducing our guest, I do want to look back to 2025 a bit. We had a wonderful year at Golden Shovel in regards to growth. We had 5 internal promotions and we had 12 new additions to our team, which include writers, production folks, sales, public relations, accounting, and account management. So a great 2025 here at Golden Shovel, and we are looking forward to 2026. Even if the world doesn't seem so positive, at least here at Golden Shovel, we can always look within. In our first episode of 2026, Bethany sits down with Jerry Foster, small town champion at Resource Bank, and they discuss the question, what if the future of America's small towns isn't decline, but possibility? Jerry shares the story behind Resource Bank's Inspire, Renew, Enjoy initiative, a national effort designed to empower volunteers, advocates, and local leaders who want to renew their communities but may not know where to start. I've been working with these folks since day one. They have a great story to tell. This is going to be a wonderful conversation. So Bethany, take it away.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Shovel Talk. I'm Bethany Quinn, president of Golden Shovel, and I am so excited to be here with my guest today. They are doing something that is so cool, so unique, and I'm excited to tell the world about it. But my guest is even better to talk about it because it's what he's doing every day. So I am interviewing Jerry Foster, whose official title is Small Town Champion at Resource Bank. Now, before I hand it to you, Jerry, I just got to say that is the coolest job title that I've ever heard. That is awesome.
It's the coolest job, I think, too. And the title is really indicative of how unique I think the role is and what we're doing. Our president and CEO, Diana Schott, has had this vision for helping small towns. And so my role really, I have no banking responsibility. My sole role is to help small towns. And so that's why Small Town Champion is the title. I hope I can live up to that when needed, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I have to point out to our listeners, because I was so impressed that Resource Bank was doing this when I first met you guys, is that you're working in communities where the bank doesn't even have a presence. So it's not like you're just helping the towns that you do work in, which is very commonplace in banks, right? You want to invest in your own community. You're actually going out into rural areas where the bank has no presence and may not ever have a client, which is hugely impressive.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's part of the fun of what I get to do is experiencing these towns. Mostly it's been in the Midwest, but we have our eye on stories in Nebraska, Kansas. Our president and CEO, again, Diana Schott, really has a vision for trying to help small towns wherever they might be throughout the United States. And, this kind of was born out of the work that we've done locally. Resource Bank, next year will be our 125th anniversary. So we've been around for a long time. Started as the first national bank of Malta. This is an ag community and area, but in the last 12 years or so, we've doubled in size, both in branches into small towns within our market. As far as like our overall assets, though, we've also doubled in size. So not just in brick and mortar. And, that came, Bethany, as a result of in our market area. And I think this is true in many areas of the country, and not just exclusive to banking either. But a lot of banks, Resource Bank is the last privately owned, locally owned bank in DeKalb County. And, we're kind of a collar county now to the Chicagoland suburbs. And so We're a real mix of industrial, commercial, but we still have those deep ag roots. And what we've seen in our market is larger banks being acquired by yet larger banks, and they end up closing branches in the small towns. And so for a resource bank, going into those communities and building brick and mortar, we've rehabbed, like in Leland, Illinois, we have such a beautiful branch there. We rehabbed a building from the late 1890s. We moved a one-room schoolhouse there that's used as a community and meeting room. I got to have a couple meetings there last week with
nice.
Village of Leland and a lot of the people there. And so, we're making these brick and mortar investments and commitments into these small towns. And it wasn't financially driven. I think the thing that's unique about Resource Bank is we're purpose driven, not profit driven. And I think people are skeptical when they hear that because, is that just a slogan, a marketing point, but it's truly how we make decisions. And so in a lot of these communities, we've gone in, and not because we did a return on investment or ran the ROI, it was because those communities deserve to have a bank. And the reason that we're really branching out with Inspire, Renew, Enjoy, which is the brand that we are really gravitating toward for helping small towns. I hope someday that it'll be a national foundation. That's really kind of one of my goals with it, is to be able to support and help communities throughout the country. But that really was born out of that sort of organic growth. And we started getting calls, would you branch into our town? And, it's difficult to do that organically. And so Inspire, Renew and Enjoy was really born out of how could we help other communities outside of just our market area. And we don't necessarily want to lead with Resource Bank. We're super proud that Resource Bank is doing this, and they are the engine behind this, the vision behind it. But to be able to take it to smaller communities, it really, they need help. There's a lot of issues with capacity for small towns, and we're just finding that through the IRE or Inspire, Renew, Enjoy, there's so many ways we can help them.
Sure. Well, and it's really interesting because, when you look at your background story, as you mentioned, as people were reaching out and wanting assistance, but the bank can't put a branch everywhere. That's not realistic for a bank or any company, right? So being able to share insight and best practices, tips and tools with community leaders is obviously a really exciting element of your Inspire, Renew, and Enjoy project. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is this idea that I know you feel very passionately about, which is that no story is too small. And before we hit record, full disclosure, we had a little side conversation, guys. And Jerry started to tell me about a town he visited of 190 people. I told him to stop because I wanted to be able to hear the story fresh with all of our listeners. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so it's one story we'll be working on, future story. I was actually in Park Hills, Missouri yesterday conducting interviews. Park Hills is an interesting story because it's 4 small towns that merged into one about 30 years ago. And so we're kind of talking about how that merger happened and what the results and the benefits of that were. And I found out about Caledonia, Missouri, through an article I had read several weeks ago. So while down that way, I just traveled to visit. Caledonia is a great little town, 190 people, but they have a champion in that community, a couple of champions who have really made a huge impact. So, that's what we're looking for, these inspiring stories when you can be successful in a town of 190 people. And it's not a collar, town to St. Louis or anything like that. It's probably an hour and a half from St. Louis or thereabouts. They're out on their own, and they're making it work. They have a beautiful mercantile store and retail that they've created. And, they really invest the time to bring people to that community through events that they host. They have I noticed one of the upcoming things is like a Christmas chocolate walk.
Mhm.
Just, really family friendly atmosphere, and what they're creating there is just really special. So that's something that we've identified as a future story.
Sure.
Hopefully this doesn't let the cat out of the bag too bad, but yeah, we would love to work with them. And, those are the types of stories that we've really tried to highlight on Inspire, Renew, Enjoy. We have an episode coming out soon. We're working on the editing for Granville, Tennessee. Granville's a town less than 500 people. We found out why they call it the volunteer state. A town that small has a roster of, I think it's about 225 volunteers. And they
Wow.
put on events and fairs and festivals throughout the year. And they work with those, volunteers to make it all happen. So
That's like half the town.
yeah, it's literally more than half, I believe, because I think they're actually around 350.
Oh, wow.
So, but it's a good example too of like tapping into not just the people in the town, but the congregations around the community, the farm families that maybe live around the communities, and people that rely on those towns, that maybe don't live right in town, but that's what they would call home.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because you used the word champion a few minutes ago. And I'd love for you to dive more into that because champion doesn't mean mayor, right? It doesn't mean elected official or leader. What does champion mean to you?
Yeah, it's the people who care about their communities, who are willing to step out. It can be a teacher. Many times, I'm finding in the stories that we're doing around the country, many people are familiar with Laurel, Mississippi, because of the hometown show with Ben and Aaron Napier. But that whole thing started with a music teacher by the name of Judy Hollifield. And she, including Aaron Napier, brought students back together to kind of discuss their downtown. And they ended up starting a Main Street, Main Street USA. And so they're a Main Street community now. And that really started it. So the champions to me are the people who really step up, and they're able to get other people to engage. The lessons that we've learned through this is that anything is possible, regardless of the size of your town. It's how many people are willing to step up and engage and try to make positive change. So those are the champions to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about the content that you have up on Inspire, Renew, and Enjoy is that it features these champions, and I feel it's very encouraging because very often people sometimes just have this idea, right, that they need to be in an official position to really make a difference. But your site is full of stories of people, like you said, who are teachers or maybe retirees or, somebody who owns a local shop, whatever it may be, who care, decide to act, and are able to mobilize people around them.
Yeah, 100%. And if you think about small towns, like obviously it depends how you define that, right? So in Illinois, I believe there's roughly 800 towns that are under 1,000 or at 1,000 or under population. And when you think about who runs those towns, so I'll talk about my hometown of Lee, Illinois, which is a town of 300. The current mayor actually is called the village president there, is a insulation contractor. Now he's had a good business for many years. He's certainly a capable person, but he is not a paid administrator. So when you think of the people that make up the village boards in these small towns, many times it's all walks of life, right? It's their second sort of full-time job a lot of times.
Sure.
So maybe you're a teacher in the daytime and you're the streets and alleys person in the evening, so you're trying to manage certain aspects of the town, run the business of the town, so to speak. And And in banking, I would always kind of refer to that as like, there are times as a business owner that you're working in your business, maybe as the technician or whatever role that might be, or you might be working on your business, you know.
Sure.
I think a lot of times the people that are managing the day-to-day affairs, your aldermen or trustees, whatever they might be called, they're really managing almost two full-time jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So when exactly are they going to drive an initiative for community development? And if you don't have
Sure.
community development, forget about economic development. You have to have a cohesion or engagement from your community to really get to that economic development for a small town, because that's going to take volunteers that are outside that board that want to engage and assist and help the board. And hopefully
Sure.
that's a great, example of sort of private citizens getting involved and engaged, and why it's so important that they do.
Yeah, and I think, given the fact that our audience is primarily people in the economic development community, hopefully that's encouraging to you. Because I know as economic developers, it can be really difficult because there's so much expectation on your organization, and you wear a million different hats. Just looking at business retention and expansion, you got to touch base with who's there, right? You have to work on workforce initiatives, but you have to bring more in, and you have to be able to develop sites to do it. And by the way, you have to work on your water infrastructure and utility infrastructure to make sure that that site is actually marketable. And so there's a million different hats that you wear, and you're simultaneously raising money and politicking and doing PR, and it's overwhelming. But the point of Inspire, Renew, and Enjoy is the fact that it is possible to distribute the work amongst the community, and that communities who do that are able to experience, accelerated results.
100%. And no community is too small to be successful. It also, like, no project could be too small. Whether it be a pollinator park or pocket park, where maybe a building, you've lost the building in a small town, but creating like social spaces, so important. But yeah, we could go on and on all day with like this whole list of all of the things that are required. But I think, building that from the community up is what's always important too. What does the community want? Engaging and having that conversation is so helpful to sort of guide what that extra work might be, and who might step up to do that. I think about the town of Albion, Nebraska, and they've just done an amazing job. They're a town of about 1,600. Now, they're the county seat in their county, which is an advantage for communities. But one of the things I was really struck by is they've done so many projects in the last 12 or 15 years. But talking to Jeff Jarecki, one of their champions there, he really described it in the videos on Inspire, Renew, Enjoy, where when one group is sort of done, maybe there's a chairperson for a particular project and a committee that they're working on that. When they get that project done, they have so many volunteers that those people will take a little time off, and another group will grab the next project and kind of head that up. And so they're sort of cycling in, I call that kind of hockey style in a way, switching teams out and a new team in, but they keep the momentum going that way without burning out. Because the other part of this, if we're being completely honest, is this is long-term visionary type work.
Sure.
You're trying to look ahead, what's best for my community in 20 years. And this is a marathon, not a sprint, to get to many of those things. So I think having those volunteers and trying to build that type of capacity is really where hopefully we can help communities with that by sort of guiding them how to do that. Whether it might even be, bring community together. We have in the town of Lee, I mentioned, we helped do a touch a truck event. Okay, simple event. Where the fire department got involved. We had local police, kids got to climb up in the fire trucks and put the fire helmets on, and we had some tractors, things like that. It was just a great cohesive community event. We had some music, popcorn. We did a movie in the fire barn, and just really fun thing. But it was really to help bring people together and hopefully find more volunteers, more people to engage and sort of realize, like, we have to take this on to help the village board, it's, sorry.
No, please. I love these stories. I'm glad that you're sharing them. And I think it's important to share specifics because then people understand that this is tied to a real community and real work that they did. So that's fantastic. So Jerry, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is the negative perception that's often associated with rural communities. And I know that changing that narrative is something that you're very interested in. So how do we do that?
Yeah, I think it's super important. We had a presentation that we've done for the Illinois Institute of Rural Affairs and for others, and we were having an internal conversation at the bank, and Carl Richards, our marketing director, and I mentioned this rural narrative a number of times, coming from conferences and different things, and you would sort of hear this, and it always sounded negative. So he literally Googled rural narrative. Yeah. Anybody out there can do that, and you'll see it's a fairly negative comment that talks about the challenges in rural America. And there are those. That's why we're here, right? That's why we're trying to help and do that. But there are so many amazing stories too. And I think just sharing those stories will help to change that narrative. There is a quality of life to living in a small town that you just can't emulate any other way, Now, there's neighborhoods I love and bigger communities or cities and things like that. And some lessons go back and forth. They can be used for both. But I really feel like the rural narrative should be so much more positive. And I think it just comes from like decades, though, of if you look at the data, there's been a lot of out-migrations. There's certainly the challenges that we're trying to address, some of the gaps and things that we're trying to address. But overall, the quality of life is pretty amazing, too. So that rural narrative being negative is something that we just really have to change. And I do think it's changing. We're seeing trends change. That data is showing more people moving to smaller communities. Sure. I think that has to do with access to fiber, having high-speed internet and connections in small towns. There's even communities that we've interviewed that have put incentives together to bring people to move there that are, at-home workers or entrepreneurs that mostly work online. So having that ability to sort of work or start a business from anywhere is changing that narrative, I think, some. And I hope we get back to, for me growing up in this area, I've seen so much innovation. I grew up in a family manufacturing business that we had patents in agriculture and things like that. And, John Deere started not very far from here in Dixon, Illinois, in a small town, but there's tons of innovations and tons of ways that can come through. And so I feel like having that connectivity is a really big thing, but being able to work or start a business from anywhere now, becomes a question of where's the best quality of life, or maybe starting it where my family is. People stay in communities, small towns, because of the quality of life, and often because that's where their family and their roots are. So the expectation that you would just get up and move isn't really that realistic, having grown up in a small town, unless you want to move away from family and, your friends and leave that behind.
And it really depends on your stage of life. So at Golden Shovel, we do a lot of town attraction campaigns. And of course, naturally, a lot of our clients that hire us for that work are in more rural areas because it's difficult to attract talent, mostly because you have no reputation. You're completely unknown, right? And what we're seeing is a lot of those boomerang campaigns being very effective. So people left, After graduating high school, they wanted to have an adventure, but stage of life, things change. And once you have a family, being near family and being in a place that makes you feel happy and safe and secure and you're familiar with can be very appealing. So we're definitely seeing that trend as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's exciting, I think, and hopefully it's the start of a new narrative. That would
Hmm.
be the ideal thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I try to remind people of, because we do a lot of presentations on rural America and how to be competitive and how to present your community, I always remind people that there's a lot of good in every community. Now, I know, Jerry, what you're doing with Inspire, Renew, and Enjoy is you're getting into some really stellar showcase stories. But even if you don't have one of those yet in your community, there's always something to be proud of. And I find that people sometimes forget. Now, some of that's our psychology, right? How we work as humans. It's we're into novel things. So when we're around the same environment all the time, we just stop noticing what's around us. So sometimes it's as simple as ask someone who came to visit you for the first time. What did you like about my town? What did you like about my community? And I guarantee they're going to say something that you forgot about, but actually really enjoy yourself.
100%, Bethany. We just had this conversation in Park Hills yesterday as
Okay.
we were doing the interviews, and it's it's this sort of gap between the internal perception of our community and the
Mhm.
external, right? And it is almost always off in some way. And it's not that people don't love their towns or aren't proud of their communities. They might be super
Sure.
proud, but it's sort of like I've got a light bulb in my living room, that one of about six that's out, and it bugs the heck out of me. But I've got to get that changed, right?
Right.
I see that. Nobody else that comes to visit my house is probably even going to notice that one isn't working. Maybe not,
Sure.
but and it won't be a big deal to them if it is, right? But I see that, and I think, oh, I got to get that changed. I got to get that done. I think in these communities, I met yesterday with one of the former mayors of Park Hills, and he's been retired, but he still feels like he needs to do more, right? And
Sure.
and that maybe this thing isn't quite right or that thing isn't quite right. I drive into town and I see this beautiful main street. I see
Yeah.
active stores and retail, a great little coffee shop, a brewery on Main Street. I didn't get to go to the brewery, but the coffee shop was great.
Yeah.
But it's this hometown sort of Main Street feel, and active, and you could just tell it was thriving.
Sure.
They were worried about which lights they needed to still fix.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of that narrative too. Is seeing what you really have. Maybe
Right.
it's a little forest for the trees, kind of a thing, but for certain, there is a gap there, I think. Um, yeah.
Yeah, there absolutely is. That's actually one of my favorite things when we do marketing strategies for communities is we do a lot
Mhm.
of stakeholder engagement. And I know myself and our team, we love doing the interviews because we find what I kind of call these gold nuggets that we get
Mhm.
to share, and people are so surprised because it's just things that they hadn't thought of, but make their community so great. For our listeners, I don't know how many of you know this. I think I've brought it up a few times, but obviously, my family is big. It is huge. I've said this multiple times to you guys. I have 7 kids, and my husband and I have lived in multiple places in the country. And I will never forget the time that we were living in a small Midwestern town, and I had a newborn, and I went to the grocery store. And I was trying to juggle the baby and I was pushing the cart and I was trying to take stuff, out of the cart and put it on the conveyor belt. And anyone who's been juggling a baby at the grocery store knows that that is not fun and not easy. And the cashier reached over and she's like, "Hun, let me take the baby. You do that. I'll hold the baby while you do that." And I was floored. I was absolutely floored, having spent the majority of my time in larger metro areas. And it's those kind of things that make such a difference to quality of life, that community connectivity, the caring for one another, that, like you said, is really hard to replicate. And you are probably so used to it if you live in a small town that you don't think there's another way. But for, outsiders, it's really stands out. It's very impressive, the community togetherness.
Yeah, 100%. And I think in some of the struggling communities, Bethany, that can be what's missing sometimes,
Yeah.
when you think about how we've done housing in, the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 decades even, we tend to pull into our cul-de-sac, we drive into our garage, close the door, and we go out to the backyard.
Right.
So having those interactions is so important. I think when small towns lose their grocery store, or they lose a business, or the school maybe consolidate, something like that, every time you have that, you lose those opportunities. And I think it's one of the most surprising things for me. This has been a bit of a journey, over the last 3 or 4 years, really, as we've started this initiative. But how important that social connectivity, that you're talking about is. It's those little interactions. And so you have to create new ways of doing that, maybe in some
Right.
towns, and I just don't think it can be overlooked. And you're so right. It is, again, that internal versus external perception.
Right.
But it is one of the reasons I love small towns. So I felt like I knew where you were going with that story. I was wishing I was in line so I could hold the baby.
Right. Yes. No, I
Yeah.
know. And I will tell you that has not happened outside of that small town for me. So it was definitely a unique experience. One of the things that I want us to pivot to is talking about resourcing. So we've obviously talked about the feel-good stories and the champions. Those people are incredibly important, but at the same time, if you're a champion, you still need some measure of resources. And I know that's something that you guys kind of help with and process through. Like, how do we help people to see what resources are available, even if they don't have a big bucket of money or, a huge paid team behind them? So what do you tell community leaders and champions who want to do something but feel the resources aren't there?
Yeah, there are so many resources. So Inspire, Renew, Enjoy. Inspire is all of the stories we're hoping to inspire small towns and share those stories. Renew is all about, we have like support organizations that are listed there. I mentioned American Main Street earlier, Community Heart and Soul. And even at the state level, you have like University of Illinois Extension Office, or in Illinois, we have the Illinois Institute of Rural Affairs, right? There's so many different outlets, and we want to guide those resources to communities, because a lot of times they're just not aware. And again, remember, in these smaller towns, these are largely volunteers that are, running the affairs of the business affairs of a community. So the Renew is really geared for that. So we have all types of partnerships, and there's private foundations. T-Mobile, has a grant for small towns. A lot of people don't know about that. And so really trying to make the Renew section sort of a toolbox and make people aware, that those are there. And then also supporting that. Recently, I was asked to go to Albany, Illinois for a town hall meeting. It was a wonderful experience. Homemade cookies and the whole 9 yards, So it was
Nice.
great. They had about 40 people in a town of less than 1,000, that came out because they care about their community. So, being able to sort of guide them to those resources, and really sort of illustrate what some of those companies and foundations do. There's so much out there, so many different ways that we can find help. So that's part of what we want to do is really make those connections to those organizations for small towns.
Yeah, and I want to point out to our listeners, because a lot of people are worried about grant funding drying up and, the changes at the federal level and how that impacts locally. It sounds like by what you're saying that a lot of those resources are from the private sector. So those things are still available and not necessarily influenced by the federal grants.
Yeah, 100%.
So Nathan and you had developed a question that I could follow up on. We kind of covered it, but it was for small towns, you talked about them receiving 340 per capita in grant funding, while bigger cities receive 525 per capita. Do you want to dive into that more, or do you feel like the question we just had answered it with what you would have said?
Well, I think that's partly the capacity issue too, right? Of having other people engage in helping in the community. So, um, what that references is the Center on Rural Innovation data that they had shared, and those are rough numbers, Bethany, but it's a large disparity between metropolitan areas versus rural communities and how much they are able to receive in grants. And a big part of that is private foundations. One of my favorite stories is Galva, Illinois, and an amazing community champion by the name of John Taylor, who was working through a master's class, and part of his class was to apply for a grant. And he applied for what's called a Levitt AMP grant. And the Levitt AMP grant is a private grant from the Levitt family that they were able to win that award because it's very competitive. But again, private foundation. And what that has done for Galva has brought music from all over the world. Every weekend they have music in their park that is just amazing. A lot of original artists. And in a town of, I think about 2,500, 2,600, they bring in 1,100 people a weekend for their music in the park.
Wow.
So think about what that does. All the food trucks they have,
Sure.
local micro entrepreneurs are able to come out to those and sell their goods, and it creates that community engagement. But all of that story started with the Levitt AMP grant, which is a private foundation. And there are too many to even try to identify,
Sure.
really. But that's part of what we're looking at and trying to identify for the towns. And so, that's just one of my favorite stories too.
That's awesome. Have you been to any of the concerts? If not, I think that needs to be on your to-do list.
No, I haven't. I have to go. Full disclosure, I have not been able to make it to one of the concerts. So I've gotten to meet John multiple times. Actually, he was invited to speak last year at the Illinois Institute of Rural Affairs as a result of the video and things that we had shared about that story. But I will make a concert there for sure. Probably this winter. Actually, they now have it going year round. And the other thing that has done for the town, so they have artists from all over the world. So they've had, I know there was a band from Jamaica that went into the schools in the area. And so the kids got to meet with, the artist and were entertained by them. There was a former a voice contestant that I think was like one of the top voice contestants and has had some hits on the radio that did a songwriting session with the middle school where she went 3 different times to the school, helped them sort of write a song and put it all together. And then the last time she was there, they performed it. So, it's just amazing the different things that you can bring in, and think of all the connectivity that goes with that,
Sure.
But the private foundation's really, really important. And the reason there's that disparity though, is because again, it's that capacity issue. Who's going to write the grant? So and that Galva story with John Taylor, it's actually Cambridge, Galva, and Bishop Hill, all 3 communities that have been really impacted by that effort. They now have music through all of that area in year round. So
Nice.
It really important to know those foundations are out there, but then accessing that, again, you need people to step up in the community like a John Taylor, to do that work and to really rally the community around it.
Sure. Yeah, and there are people, even in our network at Golden Shovel, who will sometimes write grants and then take a percentage, once the money comes in. So, I feel like if you don't have that capacity in your community, don't let that be a roadblock. Be open-minded and work your connections until maybe you can find someone who is willing to assist you. Ideally, they would do it as a volunteer, of course. But there are paid resources that are also available, and sometimes it takes a little bit of an initial investment in order to be able to, get some larger funds. But I really like that you told that story because, again, it's important for people to understand that even if you don't have all the resources in your community today, that doesn't mean that you can't go out and get them. And there are outside organizations that are writing grants that can help small towns.
100%. The story of Three Oaks, Michigan, one of my favorites. David Gross, who's the former mayor there, also a wonderful champion. But when we interviewed David, his comment, which is again on Inspire, Renew, Enjoy, but
Sure.
he says that he was out for a run, a morning jog, and he was jogging by their city hall. And there was a sign put up that said emergency meeting to discuss cash flow. And so he went in, having been a former alderman, and asked, like, how bad is it? And he was answered with, it's so bad we can't make payroll and we can't pay our utilities. Now, 3 years later, they had completed all new infrastructure, new water and new roads, right? And that didn't happen by luck, but what they had done, because they really didn't have a lot of money, they worked with an engineering firm that said, okay, Dave asked them, if you do the work and we're awarded the grant, if you do the engineering and grant prep and all of that, and we are awarded, we'll give you the work for doing all of the infrastructure. And so they agreed to that. So even though they didn't have the money to bring in that expertise, they were able to acquire the expertise and work it out. And the impact then of having the new streets and new water, they had a distillery that a guy that wanted to open a distillery came to town, saw that they were improving the community and the infrastructure, and he bought what was a huge factory there called the Featherbone Factory, which where they used to, in the turn of the last century, the featherbone was what was used to like fluff out the skirts. I don't know what you would call that necessarily, but like the
I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, it's like the old dresses from like the late 1800s, early 1800s.
Like the big hoop skirts, like
hoop
the
skirt.
the framing for the hoop skirts. Okay.
I'm not much of a fashionista, so there's that.
Well, you know what? Those are not in fashion any longer, Jerry. So that's okay.
Yeah. So the factory had been empty, for decades, and now it's called the Journeyman Distillery. Very successful, and they have 2 to 3 weddings a weekend in that town. Now, all that started, they had no money to start with, but they were able to work out with an engineering firm that would help them out. And so there are ways to get to, yes, or to finishing a project or getting it done. But I think
that's a cool story.
Oh, it is. It's one of my favorites, and so much better when you hear it from Dave. But you can go on our website and hear his full interview there.
No, that's awesome. And I think you really hit on it, right? When you're in a small community and you may have limited resources, limited means, you have to get creative. I know we do a presentation that talks about best practices for building housing in communities. We have a white paper on that too. And one of the stories that I always like to share, same type of creativity, is there was a community who had a landowner who was willing to sell the land to turn it into homes, but they didn't have any money. The city had no money, and they were too rural to attract a developer. So no one was going to come and buy it and subdivide it and start building. So the city got it under contract, and then they used their own internal resources to subdivide it. Then they had an auction to auction off the individual lots to individuals who wanted to build, and they basically did a simultaneous close. So they had no money out of pocket at all. And they were able to then pay off the landowner. They got new homes in their community, and they actually made some profit, which they used to then develop homes on another plot. So, the thing is, like, you have to think outside the box, basically. You can't use no money as the excuse not to do anything. You just got to get creative.
100%. That reminds me of Dietrich, Illinois, because it's similar there. They're actually a community that is doing their own development.
Okay.
And during COVID, so they've been successful at this for many years. And it's another story on the website. And they talk in detail in the interview that we did with them that about how they've utilized TIF districts carefully, but they've saved their school system. They've gone from about 450 in 2010, population in 2010, I think around 450 to close to 900 now. So they've had really substantial, but really controlled growth in how they're doing it. And they're able to offer these incentives and bring people to their community. So it's really starting to now kind of snowball into, in a positive way, more opportunities. Of course, there's more people.
Sure.
So now there's maybe an opportunity for another store or different things they can bring in. But in 2020, during COVID, they were starting a new subdivision. And this is a town that you talk about out of the box. They raffled off a house. So they built a spec home. The city or village of Dietrich did the development. They worked with a local contractor, built the spec home. I believe the value was something like in the high 200,000s or maybe a little less than 300,000. And they raffled it off, and I think it was like $1 a ticket or $6 or $5. They sold enough tickets then to pay for the house, and it created so much awareness for the subdivision that I believe that is now sold out a few years later.
That is so creative.
It's unbelievable, and they kept it rolling right through. The beautiful part of that story is, from what I understand, the couple that young family that won, and I believe on one ticket is what I had heard, that won the house raffle. Sure. They were getting ready to buy a house anyway. And so they made a very generous donation, like a down payment would be, to the Dietrich Economic Development Corporation, which is just their local 501c3. So the full circle of that I love, and it's all about getting outside the box and taking a little risk. That's not easy to do, because people can be super critical when those decisions are made, but really commend them on what they've done. And it's transformed that community. And again, they've been at it for a long time, but they have a great formula. But I'd never heard of a house raffle prior to that.
That's a brilliant idea. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm sure that did capture a lot of attention. I'm going to look it up after our podcast.
Well, it's on Inspire, Renew, Enjoy.
Yeah, that's what I was actually going to tell you to do. So there are so many more stories that deserve being shared. And obviously you're just scratching the surface, but you have a lot on your website. So could you give everyone your URL? And then if you want to share any contact information for how people would share their story with you, I'm sure you'd love to hear from them as well.
Oh, sure. Well, they can reach out through info@inspirerenewenjoy.com. Or my personal email, which is jfoster@resourcebank.com. And then the website, there's actually contacts on the stories that we do about the individual towns, like Dietrich is an example. Brittany Gibson, she's kind of their everything, their village clerk. She's involved in the Dietrich Economic Development Corporation and many other things, but she's our main contact person. So if there's stories that people find on the website, they'll find a contact and somebody they can reach out to in that community that's going to know a lot more about it than I do. I love getting to share their stories, but that you can get into a lot more detail of how they utilize the TIF districts, how that's impacted the school in a favorable way because of the way they've done it, and get the detail. And then, everything is at www.inspirerenewenjoy.com.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. And that is a really good point you brought up, that you can get contact information for the people behind these success stories, which is always very valuable for the economic developers that listen to our podcast. So I thank you for sharing that. Golden Shovel has been so delighted to be able to build your website and to partner with you in sharing some of these success stories. Definitely share that mission for amplifying the good that's happening in our communities. So I appreciate that. But we're not done. We're not done. So I don't know if you're aware that we are going to do a game now.
Oh, no. Okay.
Okay.
I love a game. So.
We're going to do a game. So our shovel toss game means that I am going to time you by stopwatch here on my phone for 1 minute. And we're going to see how many questions that you have not been prepped for you can answer in that minute. So rapid fire, throw your answer out. Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. If you could master any skill, what would it be?
Oh, you didn't tell me they're going to be hard questions. There's so many I'd want to master. Communication, though. Communications.
Okay. Go-to karaoke song.
Oh, go-to karaoke song. Must be the whiskey.
Place you want to visit.
I want to go back to Finland again.
Food combination you love, but others think is weird.
I found out I love chislic, and very few people have heard of that unless you live near Freeman, South Dakota. And I would say with a beer, probably.
All right. What would you do if you were invisible?
What would I do if I'm invisible? Oh my gosh, I have no idea. Things I've never contemplated before. Probably sneak into like a great concert or something. Yeah, I could go backstage maybe for a concert if nobody can see me, right? So yeah, I think that would be it. I'd probably go to a great concert. Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. Well, you got 5 questions in a minute, so not bad. Not bad.
Felt a little slow. Sorry.
That's all right. You did a good job. Thank you for playing along and for answering our questions. And of course, for sharing so much interesting insight with us today. Always a pleasure to hear about your work and to learn more about these community success stories. So thank you, Jerry, and everyone who's listening. Please do visit Inspire, Renew, Enjoy to be able to get resources and inspiration that you can then take back into your own community.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Bethany.
Thank you, Jerry and Bethany, for those nuggets of positivity. And if you need more inspiring stories in your life, please go to inspirerenewenjoy.com. And that is a website where Jerry and his team are putting together story after story after story of success stories throughout rural America. We're just getting going here at Golden Shovel in 2026. Always refer to our Resource Learning Center at goldenshovelagency.com to see our latest webinars, ebooks, case studies, events, podcasts, etc. Lots of great economic development content for you all throughout 2026. We'll be back soon with another episode of Shovel Talk.